This week on the Inside Athletic Training Podcast, we go behind the scenes with the experts keeping athletes at peak performance. Today, we're joined by Paul Buchheit and Joe Rauch, athletic trainers for the Philadelphia Phillies, to talk about the evolving role of research and innovation in professional baseball. From injury prevention to performance optimization, we're diving into how the data and research is shaping the future of the game. Enjoy the show. All right, Paul and Joe, we're excited to have you guys back on the Inside Athletic Training Podcast for a second time. For those who missed out on our previous episode, be sure to check that one out. Look forward to talking with you guys about athletic training, a little bit about your careers, but most importantly today, some interesting research projects that you guys have both been working on and been a part of. So to start, for those who might not be familiar with you guys and your careers, let's kick it off and share a bit of background information. And also your current roles in Major League Baseball. So, Paul, we'll kick it off with you.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm going into 6 years as head athletic trainer with the Phillies. I came on board here in 2020, and then I spent 16 seasons before that with Boston Red Sox. I do count 2 of those seasons that were internships just because they were really impactful seasons for me. But I got to learn underneath a lot of great athletic trainers over there, Masai Takahashi and John Yoakum, in my intern years, and then they became colleagues and friends. And then obviously I spent 14 years full time over there. I would just say, I think you had John Orson on here a couple episodes ago.
Yeah, a few weeks ago.
He talked about this guy named James Young and how JY brought him in, and credit goes to him, man, because he had a knack for bringing in good people. We got to be around a lot of great clinicians over there, athletic trainers. I think he even, 3 future head athletic trainers in MLB and a few others in other professional sports. So it was just a really good time for us to grow up together. So, and then, when I came over here, it was like, that quest for knowledge and a lot of that continual learning, bouncing ideas off each other. I found that here, and it was really, really great. So I think, obviously we'll dive into the research side of things, but that's really kind of where that all kind of is fostered from, is just being around really great clinicians.
Yeah. And Joe, feel free to share some background about yourself as well.
Yeah. Thanks, Sam. We're both, I think, speak for Paul, and we're real excited to be back on and do this again, talk about what we got going on. I'm going into my 11th spring training with the Phillies, 5 years, hired on as the minor league coordinator. Paul brought me up to the major league staff in 2020, and I'm going on my 4th season in my current role as assistant athletic trainer. So it's amazing how much has changed in the short-ish time that I've been in the game, and I'm really excited about some of the projects we're doing and the shared passion for research and education and sharing of knowledge that Paul just kind of spoke about is kind of one of our pillars, and just excited to dive into it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll do just that. Guys, let's jump right into the research. Excited to share with our listeners today on the podcast. The overall concept of our conversation is going to be kind of discussing tissue adaptation, how you guys think athletic trainers need to consider that when they're putting together throwing programs, workload, change in pitch types and grips, velocity development, overall training, and so much of the stuff you guys are involved in. You guys have done a ton of research lately, been involved in some awesome research and studies, including 3 that have been accepted and published. First, let's dive into some of the key findings that you found to be most useful about the study, titled "Change in Grip and Pinch Strength Over the Course of a Game in Professional Baseball Pitchers." We talked a little bit about this with Corey Trumbull on the last podcast. Talk us through hypotheses, key results, what you guys kind of took from that piece of research. And Paul, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think it starts with us just asking the question of we have a problem with UCL injuries. Obviously, it's one of the biggest injuries we deal with in baseball, and it seems to be on a trend upward. But we start asking the question of, well, what are the things that we can do to help, and what are the modifiable risk factors? And one of those is maybe let's focus on the secondary stabilizers, which is the flexor pronator, and what are the assessments that we can do to maybe identify if somebody's not stabilizing very well in their forearm and elbow. And so we alluded to it on the last podcast that, Joe and I and Dr. Erickson were just sitting down talking about some of these ideas, and the grip strength one was one of them, but the other one was not only how does it change over a course of a season with grip strength, but how does it change over the course of a game, before game, after game, or during the game. But then we also talked about the index finger and middle finger because, those are the primary digits used for the fastball. And, is there any type of fatigue related assessments that we can identify there? And so we did grip strength and pincer strength, which is like long finger strength, opposition strength, and with the index and middle finger. And what we did was we did it at our Dominican Republic Academy, and Kata Isai did a great job down there of gathering the data. But what we found was what we expected to find was that there would be a pretty stark change of grip strength and pincer strength over the course of a game for these pitchers.
Sure.
And kind of thinking, is this a way that we could potentially find out where a person's, a certain pitcher's threshold might be of, are they getting fatigued? Should we dive a little deeper into their workload? Should we dive a little deeper into their training, so that way we can match their workload to, their competency. And so when we did the study, what we found was that, grip strength tended to decrease over the course of the game in dominant grip strength each inning. And it seemed to kind of reach its peak deficit around the fourth inning. And so we said, okay, well, that's really interesting. And what we did find is that in the fifth inning, sixth inning, it seemed to spike up a little bit. And Joe was the first one to say, well, you look at the sample size, and we rarely let our pitchers in the DR Academy go 5-6 innings. So it was probably the pitchers who were a little bit more physically mature and probably a little more advanced that were getting those late innings. And so that's probably why you see a little bit of an increase there in grip strength. And we really didn't see, it's interesting, we really didn't see anything with the index and middle finger pincer strength deficits. And we were kind of shocked by that. We're like, wow, I wonder why that is. Well, since then we've had a lot more questions and started to delve into it. And I think it's because like we were doing long finger, like distal interphalangeal strength, which is possibly isolating more of the flexor digitorum profundus. And so, we start thinking, well, you don't throw a pitch like that. You don't throw a pitch with a straight finger. You throw it with a little bit of a curve. And so we said, all right, well, what muscle does that? And then we were like, okay, well, that's probably more the superficialis. And that's led down to a really good path of questions and discussions. And I'm sure we'll get into that. But what we did with the study is, I think what we garnered from that is kind of similar to what we found with the grip strength study, is that, when you start to see a grip strength deficit on their dominant side after an outing, that obviously they're fatiguing out in the forearm. So we need to make an adjustment, right? We need to modify that risk factor either through, some soft tissue of the forearm. Maybe we have to assess the elbow joint itself. Maybe they have an underlying injury they're not talking about, or they're just fatigued. And then if they have a bilateral difference, it's okay, maybe they have some central nervous fatigue. So I think it really matched up with our other study fairly well. And it really offboarded we got, I guess offboarded into another discussion on another question we had that we wanted to research. So,
And Joe, when you guys get that information, and it's seemingly very useful for your staff and just for the betterment of your players, what do you exactly do? How do you take this and implement, in spring training? How much does it impact, your planning when you do get really good research like this going forward?
The piece that really stuck out to me, combining this with the previous grip strength study, was that we were wrong. We expected there to be a correlation to injuries, and we didn't necessarily see that. Now, we were actively managing these patients and these players like in real time, so that has something to do with it. But it was the piece for me of building a program appropriate for what we were finding. And as Paul just mentioned, there was two interpretations of this data between these two studies that we took. And one was understanding what was actually a local problem, what was an indicator of a, a possible issue at the flexor pronator group, at the dynamic stabilizers in general, through that form that needs to be addressed versus what's more global. Is this a moment to pull back a little bit and maybe historically a weak grip strength would be interpreted as weakness, and then reinforced with more repetition and exercise and therapeutic exercise and maybe more work to combat that measure. In reality, it was just maybe a poor ability in that moment to produce force. And maybe that's more of an indicator of fatigue. And it's instead of laying more work on top of something that's already struggling to get to where we needed to, it's a moment to pull back and get after whatever recovery choice you decide to make from either a local tissue standpoint, as we kind of talked about before, or like globally and neurologically. And those were the things that, and we'll keep going through this, but when you start to come up with those conclusions that we can use as athletic trainers clinically to make good decisions, that's really exciting for us.
Yeah. Well, I talked to Jamie Reed a couple weeks ago about the Major League Baseball report on pitcher injuries, which, feel free to jump in and chat about that at any point. I know you guys are passionate about that as well. Jamie spoke a lot about, in recent years, grip has been a huge topic, stuff people were using back in the day, even a couple years ago to get a better grip, sticky stuff, whatever you want to call it. How did you guys factor that in, or how does that factor in to a study like this where, grip's so important to pitchers, to players, things they're using to get a better grip to, ease up on the tension throughout the rest of their arm? How do you guys kind of manage that or factor that into a study like this?
Yeah, let's say that I think it factors in a whole heck of a lot, because now we're talking about, potentially having to grip the ball a little bit firmer, and so that's going to require a little more strength, a little more neuromotor recruitment. So you may have the fatigue factor. You have, again, a tighter grip on the ball. So I do think that makes this this concept of tissue adaptation, strength, tissue resiliency, I think it makes it even more important now. I know that there was a study that was done with MLB that didn't show any correlation between the change and inability to not use sticky substances anymore in injuries. But we just don't. Theoretically, you're going to have maybe a little bit tighter grip. So we want to make our players and help them become more resilient. And so we think this could add a key piece to that. And this is just assessments, right? This is not even the implementation of how you build that tissue resiliency.
And you got, one thing that's interesting to me, I know this was one single affiliate throughout the year. When you guys are working with players and trying to conduct research, do you find it's difficult to get buy-in for players to participate in studies like this? Or are they also interested in kind of, hey, Paul and Joe and the staff are looking to gain information that's going to help me, going to keep me healthy, I want to be a part of this? What's kind of the relationship athletic trainer to player when you're trying to do research like this?
Yeah, the studies are player facing. I mean, we tell them right from the get-go what we're looking at, and we're telling them what we feel like we don't know, how it can impact their ability to not just stay healthy but perform well, and kind of talk to them about what answers we're chasing, and then we're just honest about what we need from them. We also try, when we come up with our study designs, that's a big part of our study design conversation, on what's fair to ask in season, what's a realistic thing from not just a compliance, but just respecting that they still have to compete and win and do what they need to do. So that all becomes part of the conversation for us in the back end. Once we feel like we've gone there, we keep it open and we keep it player facing. We keep them updated with what we're doing. I think we discussed this in the grip strength. It was right there in the chart. They could look at it every single day when they came in. They knew exactly what we were doing, exactly how we were using the information, and exactly how it impacted what we were doing to treat them and take care of them. And when you have that sort of honesty, two things happen. One, players buy in and they're willing to do it, which is great.
Yeah.
And two, players are skeptical and maybe not quite ready right away. And then we get some data and it starts to become a little bit more normalized and guys start to see it and we start to have more buy-in. The conversation in the clubhouse changes a little bit. And now guys feel a little bit more comfortable with it. And now we have even more buy-in and it becomes, just really a part of just a regular part of the day, just a regular part of the care plan. And a large percentage of the stuff that we have is part of our regular care plan that we're just diving into a little deeper and just cross-referencing it with some of the other information that's become available to us.
Mm-hmm. And Paul, to wrap up our conversation about this particular study, one thing in reading this I found super interesting was you stated the ultimate purpose is to figure out whether there's a critical percent decline, like kind of like an alert to this guy needs to be done. He needs to come out. How does that kind of translate to big leaguers or in the moment? There's so much context that goes in during a game. And this research is obviously part of that. How does that factor into kind of what you see going forward in terms of, evaluating grip during game and making decisions based on that data?
I think you said it right there. It's the context. I don't think we could take one measure and say this person's shouldn't be pitching. Whether it's grip strength, whether it's a range of motion or what their self-perceived exertion is. Like, I think you have to take it all into context. And number one is what does the player think? And I think we are a little bit more timid to make decisions off of objective data until we know, for sure that data translates into an actual decision. For example, if a grip strength drops 20 pounds during the course of a game, we better be dang sure that that's not just a normal occurrence across all pitchers, before we make a decision, because then you can create a negative reinforcement for that pitcher that's saying, well, I got to make sure my grip strength is going to be good because I'm not going to be pitching. Yeah. And I don't think we're advocating to kind of roll out like grip strengthening in between innings. I think it was more of just kind of let's understand what does occur over the course of the game. But we really need to normalize it to the player and have some normalized data across a cohort, because again, it's one piece of data. There's so much other information that could be impactful there. Biomechanics, obviously what the player thinks, what the clinician is feeling in their exam. I think that all plays into it. So yeah, we don't make decisions off of one piece of data.
Yeah, totally makes sense that obviously this was this is a study done, one affiliate. You can't kind of blanket make statements for everything else going on, but still good to have, an idea of what you guys are chasing there. Well, I want to move on, Joe, let's talk a bit about the next study. Super interesting. Hidden pitches in Major League Baseball. So much goes into, pitch counts, and even at the Little League level, how much should you be throwing? We talked to Jamie Reed a ton about this, about youth arm health, sports specialization, pitch count tracking. Things have changed so much the past decade, 2 decades. It's almost incredible to think about what people were doing back in the day. So, we know that the overall concept, pitch counts are so tightly monitored in Major League Baseball. Warm-up pitches, throwing between innings, getting loose, not as closely monitored. Talk us through this study, what went into getting it started, and kind of some of the key results as well.
Well, what's maybe one of, if not the top buzzword in sports performance in the last decade is probably workload, right? So our real question was, what does that mean? What is workload? And I think it gets confused sometimes with limiting exposures, hoping that you're just not going to get hurt. Sure. Versus what I think we believe workload is, which is maximizing availability and performance, and making decisions to achieve those goals. So when we talk about the pitch counts you alluded to, and even some of the pitch smart and some of those things that have been put out on the amateur level, they're great and they're really good, but something was still not going in the right direction because we continue to see the elbow injuries that we see and the shoulder issues and the lost time, et cetera.
Yep.
So we wanted to know what piece we were missing there, what was not there. And that was where we kind of concluded the conversation with was, well, what about all the other stuff that's going into how they prepare, how they get, they're on a 100 pitch count that day, but what about how they play catch in the afternoon? What about how they maybe a bullpen pitcher, a relief pitcher is throwing 12 pitches at 3 o'clock in the afternoon just to sharpen something up or work on something? What about warming up in the bullpen? What about when they get hot and then they don't go in the game and then get hot again? What about those pitches? They're ramping themselves up. And then for starting pitchers are more consistent with the pitches between innings. I mean, they may not all be the same intensity, but they're ramping themselves up to be prepared to compete, right? So it's not nothing. That had to mean something. So we went to study it, and we kept track of all of those pitches that I just mentioned, specifically pitches in the bullpen before the game for the starting pitcher, between innings, warm up before the first inning. For relief pitchers, we tracked how many pitches they threw in the bullpen before they went in the game, and again, same thing between innings. And we tried to correlate that to injuries. The study was a little shaky on a direct correlation. Again, same thing with the grip study, small sample size. And I think it's worth noting again, we were treating in real time. So when moments of high risk came, we would make the correct adjustment.
Sure.
But what I think we can take from it is what we found was almost half, like 48%, almost half of the total pitches thrown in a season by a pitcher were in that category of hidden pitches.
Yeah. Wow.
And it's something that we need to take into account when we're building off-season throwing programs and guys that want to throw plyometric balls or weighted balls, and say, they do. I don't do much, they say, right? I don't do much. It's just 8 exercises and just 5 throws each. And well, that's 40 throws. And now you're on a day that we're going to make our first leap to a certain distance or a first leap into a mound, and we're not taking that into account. That's a piece of it. In my previous role on the rehab side of things, that first jump from throwing bullpens to a live BP, maybe we weren't considering getting loose on the game mound for the first time, or that up down, adding in an extra 8 pitches for that second inning for the first time. And maybe that was a piece, and that's what we want to dive into. And I think that turned out to be true. And as we'll continue this conversation, that adaptability and understanding what we're actually asking guys to do more appropriately, I think gives us the fuel to maybe make more appropriate progressions, more appropriate decisions on pull back and push. And really kind of, I'm stealing this from Paul, but flatten out the inflection points and make them a little bit less, what's the word I'm looking for? A little bit less fluctuating, right? A little smoother curve, so that we give the tissue the correct time to adapt to what we want it to do, which is, throw 200 and some innings, or as an amateur player, just like be able to take the field consistently and go play with your friends. Like, that's all like an important piece. So while our hypothesis may not have been proved in this paper, we still thought there was a lot of really good information to take from it.
Yeah. And Paul, it seems, after reading this study and speaking with you guys about it, it seems so obvious that some research about hidden pitches, like Joe just explained, was needed. Why do you think that it's been so long before stuff like this is studied and before people start to consider pitch counts, including hidden pitches, versus just like max effort in-game stress pitches like that? What's the, I guess, delay in this research in coming out?
Yeah, I would say most of the decision makers on those pitch counts aren't doing the research. So, pitching coaches and that sort of thing, they're not looking at it from that perspective. And that's really what we, Joe and I talked at length with our pitching staff, is like, just give us time to respect the tissue adaptation, and we will help you build a more resilient player. And it's not just flattening the curves, as Joe was talking about. It's like, it is, but it's really pushing the workload forward. It's like, as Joe said, like, you're throwing half your pitches in hidden or off the mound in practice. Are we preparing our players, our pitchers, to get ready for spring training that way, right? I would say this: a lot of third-party performance centers getting a lot of guys ready, feeling great, throwing 25-pitch bullpens. They're throwing max effort. They're doing great. And then they get in camp and they have to throw a 51, 57-pitch live BP, total pitches, let's say, with warm-ups and sides and all that. Well, they don't have the throwing economy, right? They don't have the capacity to get there. So I think it's really just getting the volume to where it needs to be. And so, I think that may be the reason. I know I think it was the Astros did a study just finding out how many pitches pitchers were throwing in the bullpen. And they found that there was like a pretty large discrepancy between what was reported and what was actually happening, so I mean, that's the case too. So, from our perspective, we were tracking all the pitches, which is great, but we were also having the active management of saying, well, yeah, we're getting pretty heavy on that workload in this microcycle. We're going to flatten that curve. We're going to say, give them an extra day, or maybe let's bump down the bullpen. I would say on the amateur side, I mean, we have the Pitch Smart campaign, which actually kind of feeds in this really well. But what do we know? High schools aren't even following all that well. And forget, the showcases and travel baseball. There's no guidance. There's no tracking. And so now you have amateur players who are, maybe max pitching one day, and then they're coming back the next day and doing it again. And the guidance is there. We're just trying to highlight that you got to respect the tissue, you got to respect the player, and you can get more out of him in the end.
Yeah. And I think that's exactly where I want to go with this in terms of respecting the player, the tissue, the body itself. So you guys, that's your main job. Keep players on the field, ensure health, limit games lost. That's not everybody's job. So the people you work with in the Phillies organization, decision makers, like you mentioned, managers, pitching coaches, other people who are calling the shots in terms of a guy coming in and out. Talk about that relationship, its importance to your organization and to the job of an athletic trainer to have a strong communicative relationship with a pitching coach, strength coach, with everybody, but ultimately those people who are making decisions based on your data to, when to get a guy out if something's going on.
Yeah, I would say we were at the Philly Symposium, I don't know, it feels like a month ago, and maybe it was only a couple weeks. And we got this question. It was a lot of high school athletic trainers were asking us, like, well, how do you have that conversation? And I was like, the conversation is that injury prevention and performance are the same, are different sides of the same coin, in my opinion. Like, if you enhance somebody's ability to stay healthy, you're going to give them more exposures to practice. You're going to give them a longer ramp up time of skill development. You're going to be, obviously mitigating some of the risk factors that could limit them down the road. And that's ultimately going to help them to, get with their pitching coach and work on stuff, like, we're not actually pulling back. We're saying, listen, we want you to work with him more, but just do it in a planned, prospective way, instead of, hey, let's just do this. And then, like you talk about with Jamie Reed, the change in pitch grips and all that stuff, that happens on the fly, but that changes the stress profile for that forearm, for that elbow, for that shoulder. And so if you just respect that, and that it requires some onboarding for the tissue to adapt, if it needs that, that could be the difference maker. And so when you explain it that way, it's like, okay, well, if we maybe just open up the conversation, I don't think coaches are exempt from the injury side, right? I think they own it too. Sure. And we own performance. I mean, Joe, you've seen a lot of times we're looked at as to help in the performance side. And so I think everybody shares it. And so when you get into that integrative shared mindset, it's like, okay, we're all doing the same thing. Let's do injury prevention and performance at the same time.
And Joe, to elaborate on that, are those conversations, or can they be difficult with kind of explaining? I guess my question is, do people always understand your guys' motives, what you're doing, the performance side of things, when they might be a coach, a manager, someone new to the organization? Is it difficult to kind of, in certain instances, get everyone on the same page to understand what your ultimate goals are as an athletic trainer?
I think the answer to that is yes and no. But ultimately, that's part of our job, is to make sure that they understand that and where we're coming from that side of things. At the end of the day, I was told this a long time ago, but the players want to know what we can do to help them. And if you have that answer for them, that will help to create that buy-in from the coaches and other people in the performance world, right? Because there's so many different bubbles now that have to kind of come together in that big Venn diagram of our strength coaches, our biomechanists, our sports analysts, our sports performance analysts, our the list goes on and on, right? We all having a common goal is a very easy thing to sit on a podcast and discuss and speak reverently about, and the actual implementation of that is very, very difficult.
Yep.
So I think it comes from continued open conversation. I think it comes from consistency, sometimes in difficult non-receptive areas, consistency and microdosing to kind of build that trust. I think the game right now is open to information and open to people that want to be a part of that. And I think we're continuing to push ourselves as athletic trainers to say, we can really help these conversations that you're having if we can, be a voice in there. And the specific cases that are really fun are when we get a biomechanist report, or we sign a free agent and we say, and it says like, hey, he can be good again if this happens, or biomechanist report or pitching coach report says the velocity is missing. We think this is the key. And we read that and say, well, I mean, I can help restore range of motion. I can get with our strength coaches and create strength. Like I can put them in a position where our coaches can do what they need to do to make them better, and they can be they can physically handle it. They can be resilient enough to try a new arm slot. They can be resilient enough to throw an extra 10 pitches and really work on a new slider grip. That's something that we can actually affect. And when that is the piece of the conversation to say, I want you to be able to do whatever you need to do as a coach to make him better, and then we can win and we can spray champagne and do fun things. That's a common thing that I think everybody can really appreciate. And that certainly helps. I would say for us here, it's one of my favorite things to talk about, our relationship with our strength coaches that we have here, Morgan and Fury, with our pitching coach, with Caleb and Cap when he's gone now, but Mark Lowy, like that's my favorite thing. I love this group that we get to work with, and it's a strength of ours, I think, that people like buy into. So I can wax ecstatic about that for a while.
Yeah, I think, the concept of an athletic trainer and what we try and do here on the podcast is showcase really behind the scenes, obviously the title Inside Athletic Training, give people an idea of what you do on a daily basis, but also the bigger picture where you're not just, I bet a lot of people who haven't got to know you guys or know much about the profession might think, tape an ankle, put ice on an arm, that's what you do. Paul, do you find that, we're always trying to uplift the profession? There's so much amazing stuff you guys are doing research-wise with the team physicians to give a credible voice to the entire group and PBATs in general. Do you find that that's kind of misconstrued from the outside, just being in the profession for so long?
Yeah, I that's a good question. I do think that, being an athletic trainer, when I got into the profession, I was so gung-ho. I was like, oh, man, athletic trainers are going to change the world. And then you get into the profession, you start to kind of see how the dynamic works. And a lot of times, we are the support member, right? We were supporting the team. We're supporting the player. We're supporting the coach or the pitching coach. And what I've realized is that we're here to help. And so sometimes we need to be a little bit more forthright with that. And I think that what Joe was alluding to is, you guys want guys to move more efficiently? Sure, we'll help you with that. But allow us the time to do that, right? If we don't have a schedule that we can actually work with that player before they go out, and we have a bunch of meetings, we can't get to them, or, in the secondary school setting or the collegiate setting, the bus times are just, not there, or they're not opening up the hours for the athletes to come in. There's not much we can do there. Right? We need time, but time also for the tissue to adapt. So if you want to start a new pitch, yes, I've seen some big leaguers do it in real time. I've seen them do it in one game without even practicing it. But that's not the norm, right? The norm is they need time to adapt. They need time to learn and self-organize. And so, yeah, I think we as athletic trainers, I find that the timing's right for us, right? Is that we can be forthright. We can be, forthright to go up to the coach, like say, listen, do you want to win? Do you want to help these players? I can help if you allow that time to happen. If you just have a plan, can we sit down and talk about this plan? And I think that has resonated well here. I know that's not the case in a lot of other places, but I think we're heavily underutilized, to be honest with you. And we're being pulled in 9 million different directions because we are, doing our EMR notes and scheduling physicals and, making doctor's appointments, covering fields, communicating with strength, communicating with coaches, that, take away COVID, our jobs went fourfold there in terms of workload. We're pulled in all these different directions. Can we just get to the heart of what we're trying to do here and create efficiency? One of the things that Joe and I gripes us the most is coaches want to have these meetings right in the middle of treatment hours. No, we're prioritizing the player because the player comes first, right? If you want to meet, come in early. We're here. When athletic trainers are the
always there,
not to leave. It's you can't just monopolize our time. Respect that.
Yeah, I think what you said there, really hits home. You're not just a support staff, someone that's just around in case something bad happens. What you are is proactive, research-based healthcare professionals who, like you said, can give your time with players, and you'll put them in a better position to succeed and do what the coaches want. So I think that's a vastly underrated aspect of what you guys do and the whole staff there in Philadelphia. Obviously a great group there. And I do think that the expansion of staffs has made a huge impact. You guys aren't having to do everything. Back in the day, there was a head and an assistant, and some guys were wearing baseball pants, and some weren't certified athletic trainers. And so much has changed to the point where you're such an integral part of the performance staff and performing, not just kind of like a reactive treating injury job. So I think that's important for people to understand. And it's nice to kind of talk about this research to showcase what you guys are doing. And with that, leading into the last, kind of study I want to talk about today, identifying the underlying mechanisms responsible for internal rotation deficit in pitchers. Paul, talk us through hypotheses, key results, what you guys found with this one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this was born out of, the continued research by Dr. Steve Thomas over at Jefferson University. He's the one who does our shoulder MSK ultrasounds. And, they had done some research on humeral retrotorsion and notifying or identifying that is a key factor in the loss of internal rotation, range of motion. That is a morphological change. It's not modifiable. It is what it is, right? We know what happens. But we also know that GERD's been talked about. We also know that GERD has been debated. And so what we wanted to say is as part of our tissue adaptation theme is what are the underlying mechanisms for loss of internal rotation in spring training? So if we have a dominant side that has a total arc that is limited with internal rotation being that limitation, what is the underlying mechanism for that? And, I know there's been a lot of research out there. One of my former mentors, Mike Reinhold and Kevin Wilk, they'll talk about the soft tissue shortening of the posterior cuff. But whereas we were looking at it as, what does it look like when they're first coming into spring training, right? Yep. They haven't really added a ton of workload. They're just getting kind of ramped up. They really haven't got too much, hands-on treatment or stretches. And that's what we want to look for. And so doing the regression analysis, what we found is that, yes, humeral retrotorsion is a big factor for the internal rotation loss. But also it's the posterior capsule thickness. That posterior capsule thickening occurs in because the rotator cuff may not be dynamically stabilizing as well, and so you get some microtrauma, you get some additional collagen laydown and fibrosis, and so the posterior capsule thickness can thicken, and that can actually drive that humeral head anterior superior, changing that axis of rotation posterior superior, and so we think that's a key factor, and that's what we found. However, we understand this is temporal, right? So meaning that it changes over time. These guys are coming in fresh, so their tissue really hasn't had that time to adapt. And so what we see is once we get our hands on them, once they start throwing more, that posterior capsule thickness may become a little more pliable. And when we see the loss of internal rotation in season, and maybe because of that acute effect, they just went out and pitched 6 innings, 100 pitches. Yeah, they do have some posterior cuff shortening. Dr. Thomas had noted in one of his previous studies that the pennation angle actually increases of the teres minor and infraspinatus. So there is some soft tissue adaptation that happens on an acute setting. But we also want to identify what's happening on the chronic side. So I think it matches up really well with what's been done previously. Again, it's identifying the timing of the season, identifying that player's specific pattern. Is it a loss of motion coming from a soft tissue shortening? Is it coming from a capsular pattern, or a combination of both? I think that's really important to know. And so that is kind of in the theme of, our tissue adaptation, research.
And Joe, anything to add there on your end?
I think it gives a good glimpse. I think it continues to paint a picture that these athletes that are well known to be great, they're very pliable, right? They respond to tissue. So you take this study, combine it with the UCL study that Dr. Erickson and Dr. Chalmers did a couple years ago that showed the UCL will expand and contract and get shorter and longer based on what's done. We're painting a picture that this body is resilient enough to do what it needs to do and stay healthy if we give it the time to do it correctly. That the as Paul talked about, it's a snapshot of what these guys look like coming in, and sometimes that thick capsule, as he discussed that microtrauma a little bit, it's a picture of someone who maybe wasn't as compliant as we would have hoped in some specific rotator cuff exercises, but maybe went through some overload training that they might not have been ready for, and that could be a problem that we need to address right away. And we're putting those kind of pictures together, which I think is really, really fascinating. But overall, we're getting more granular and understanding how the body is so resilient and what we need to be aware of to program correctly on boots on the ground.
And you mentioned there, Joe, I think it's interesting, giving the body time it needs. You guys don't always have the time. Spring training right now, you may be building up. Paul, you mentioned workload, and Joe as well being very common term and what you're trying to grow right now in spring training. When you guys get into the thick of the season and you don't always have time to heal correctly or do what you need to do, how does that change kind of implementing what you learned from these papers toward getting things done in the thick of a playoff race, which you guys have been in with the Phillies for so many years now?
Well, it's about knowing when to push and knowing when to pull, and it's about interpreting the information correctly. As I kind of alluded to earlier, it's not about seeing a low force output and thinking somebody's weak. These guys really generally aren't weak. In the case of this posterior inferior capsule thickness, what we'll see, I'll give this example. What we'll see is that the actually resting joint changes. The ball is sitting in front of the socket, and that's its kind of resting position. You see that in that forward head, the kind of rounded shoulder type of look or whatever. Now you add in the fact that on the very very deep levels, it's not kind of in its normal anatomical position. You take all these factors in that were in the paper we just kind of discussed. You can create a strength or a force output increase just by putting that joint back into a normal position. That's through gradiated joint mobs, grade 3, grade 4 joint mobilizations into some of that tissue. That's the pliability Paul kind of talked about there a little bit. So instead of seeing somebody with an external rotation of 0 degrees that's maybe a little bit weak or a little bit compensating an upper trap and thinking, we need to program out 3 sets of 10. We're going to do this every day until you are able to kind of do this the way I want to. Maybe the answer is pulling back a little bit, spending a little bit more table time, a little bit more focused soft tissue work, a little bit more focused joint mobility work, communication with the strength conditioning coaches about how we're loading that tissue maybe a little bit more appropriately. And what we see oftentimes is when we reassess that strength measurement, we are getting the output we're looking for without adding in the stress of extra repetition of exercise or things like that. And under that umbrella, we're able to focus the work where it needs to be, which is on the field. Right. So now those extra reps that we would have put into shoulder care exercise or whatever is now available for them to go play catch. And they're in a better position to be resilient. And here you're starting to see us loop a lot of the same concepts from the beginning of this conversation, right? Like be more resilient to what you're doing, program that stuff out of season. And that's an example of something we would do in season to, create that environment that they stay on the field. The work, again, maximizing their availability on the field. And if it means we pull back, then we make the adjustment. We communicate about where that needs to be.
hmm And Paul, one thing, the concept of tissue adaptation that we're talking about a lot today. A lot of our listeners on this show are people that might want to be your intern one day, college students, people studying anatomy for the first time, or professors looking to take stuff from big league athletic trainers to their classroom. If someone were to ask you on a basic level, tissue adaptation in correlation with the three studies we talked about, and just for you to explain the importance of understanding that and actually the baseline, what's kind of your explanation there to someone who you might be teaching this information from for the first time?
Yeah, that's a good point. There was a high school, local high school in Philadelphia that came in for like a field trip in January. That was kind of one of their questions, like, where do you see some of the research going? And I was like, well, I can tell you where our research is going. It's like tissue adaptation. And they're like, what does that mean? And I was like, well, that's a good question. So you look at tissue adaptation in the different types of tissue. So we talked about posterior capsule thickness is that's you're making somewhat of a plastic change there because it's non-contractile. So that is something you probably are going to need. We require manual therapy, and we can get expert clinicians and focus on the treatment for that. But if you're focusing on muscular tendon tissue, which is kind of where the majority of muscular injuries occur, right? The muscular tendon junction. Well, you need to have a higher degree of strength. And that's all the different facets of strength. It's absolute strength, it's endurance, it's neuromotor recruitment, it's neuromotor excitability. It is the actual integration of that muscle into the tendon, and then you get into the tendon research. So, which hasn't been done a ton in the upper extremity, and that's kind of where we're going to be going. You talk to a lot of the researchers down in Australia, and Ebony Rio was on a PBATS symposium for spring training and talking about a lot of patella tendon research and Achilles tendon research and how you can build more resilient tendon. They call it tendon stiffness, which is kind of a weird term, right? You don't think of like stiffness being a good thing, but you can do that through the appropriate training, through eccentrics or heavy resistance, slow tempo. Or isometrics, but it really hasn't been done in the upper extremity. And so I think it comes down to building a good strength profile and then doing the types of training that will target the tissue you're looking for. So somebody may have a really strong muscle, but a really weak tendon, and they have a lot of tendinopathy problems. Well, that means their training is going to be shifted more towards tendon responsive loading. And that's going to be the stuff we talked about. Muscular adaptations, I mean, just go into strengthening, conditioning, coursework, and you'll learn a lot about that. And then, as we talked about, the capsule is targeting the tissue with what the treatment is needed, what the intervention is needed. So I think it comes down to the evaluation. Joe said, what are you evaluating? What's the timing of the season? What changes can you make? I mean, if you're looking at muscular tendon junction and trying to change that tissue, it's going to take a long time. It takes, I think Bowman, that meta-analysis in 15 said it takes like 12 weeks. So it takes time. Can you make changes in the short term? Yeah, you can do a ton of some isometrics today, decrease that pain, maybe improve that neuromotor recruitment, and kind of get them through. So that way, over time, you can build that tissue resiliency. But that's where the conversations comes in with the pitching staff or your skill coaches is saying, well, we're going to keep them available because we feel like that's reasonable for them. But we do want to modify some of their skill activity because we want to maybe add in some more targeted tissue adaptation, whether that's manual therapy or the exercise intervention. So it's a really fun, like, push-pull. And Joe keeps, explaining that push-pull. It gets more difficult when you're in season, though. So it's best to identify it in the off season and come up with that plan so you can get ahead of it. That is the number one thing, but we don't always have that luxury.
And Joe, you guys are both extremely passionate about research. Talk to us a bit about kind of your plans going forward. I know you have some papers in the queue. What are you guys looking forward to most in your research coming up here in the next couple of years?
Well, I think it's first, most specifically, it's the upper extremity tendon stuff Paul just talked about. I think I think it's a really interesting piece. I think it's going to be a really good, informative kind of descriptor of what's necessary from a dynamic stability in the elbow, and maybe get more granular on how it's functioned and what it takes to stay, all the words we've used over and over again, resilient and adaptable and all of those things, so that we can program things out more appropriately or have more specific conversations and recommendations to our counterparts in the whole performance realm.
Yep.
And I think that's the second piece for me that's really exciting, is that when there's a culture of research with the Phillies that goes back to Jeff Cooper, who's PBAT's Hall of Famer, and it feels like a big responsibility to continue that, which I'm very it's great. It's very, very good. And we spent so much time about the structure, and there's so many papers that we've done about the structure of what is coming, as we just kind of talked about. Now we're getting into how it's functioning a little bit, how we can program a little bit. And what I'm really excited about what we've done and what's coming is that it's very applicable for athletic trainers. And it's very digestible and applicable in the athletic training room. It's stuff that we can do on a major league level. It's things that I think can be applied for people who are working with baseball players on the amateur side, both as an athletic trainer in the dugout and in the athletic training room, but also for people that are working at the outside providers and these off-season training facilities, that hopefully they can take some of this information, and hopefully we can all get a little closer to the same page on, what this looks like to keep guys who want to play baseball on the field playing baseball.
And I like the kind of the culture of research that you mentioned, dating back to some longtime athletic trainers in the organization. Not every organization is like that, like we talked about. Paul, talk about how important this is to you to see your names on these studies, to add a credible voice to the research as an athletic trainer, being an impactful piece of the performance team, not just a reactive support staff member, as we touched on earlier. Why does this mean so much to you, and why do you think athletic trainers need to be more vocal about being involved in these studies?
I think we can help. I think we're underutilized. That's it. I'm very passionate about athletic training, and I think I'm becoming more passionate about it because I see it. We have great people. I came from an organization that had great people in the athletic training department here too. And I think we're making positive changes. And I think on the research side, I don't know if I get a kick out of, it's cool having your name on there, but I think I think the best part about it is we're asking real questions that we're looking at each other hey, why do we do that? What can we do about that? And we're like, hey, let's study that. And we're like, cool. So I think we're taking things that are really applicable in real time and for now and saying, well, how can we help that discussion? Because, these are the things that we can take as athletic trainers and go to those discussions with the coaching staff or front offices or, whoever, and say, well, this is how we can help. And these are the things we need to respect, but this is how we can help. So.
Yeah. And I think that's such a key point. You guys are all, as athletic trainers, so proactive in solving problems. That's something I think I see so much value in PBAT's members, willingness to learn, to study, to just help, serving, but also being vocal in terms of getting things done and doing what you need to do to help the organization. Well, guys, I really appreciate your time joining the show. I can't let you off without, last time we skipped out on the final segment we call Extra Bases here on the Inside Athletic Training Podcast. So 4 quick questions for each of you guys. Share some info about yourselves and what you like about athletic training. Joe, we'll kick it off with you on first base. Favorite athletic training room to work in outside of Philadelphia?
Probably Atlanta. There's some space there. There's an office. There's a separate wet room. Fred and his guys do a great job taking care of us. It's always a great game. 2 good teams. It's always exciting. It's always exciting times to be there. So I'll go with Atlanta.
And Paul, how about you?
Well, I was going to say the same, but I would say the corollary to that, was the New York Yankees. They also have a good space there. And they do a good job. Phil does a good job in the clubhouse there, but there's just good space for us to work. We can get on, 5 tables just running all day long of helping guys out. Other places maybe not have as much space.
Well, Joe, I think probably 85% of our guests have said Atlanta. So you guys are here on the same page with a lot of those guys. Joe, moving on to second base here. I always say you guys have such an awesome vantage point to watch games unlike any other, just coaches, managers, players, and you guys. What's your favorite big league stadium to watch a game from the dugout?
This might be cheating, but it's not close. It's Citizens Bank Park, and it's not close. And the way our teams played the last few years and the way our city embraces us when we're doing well, there's in the summertime, the last couple of years in Philadelphia, you do three things. You go down the shore, you go to the beach, or you're at Citizens Bank Park. And it feels like we're throwing a party every night with 30,000 of our best friends, and our guys are playing great. And I just don't think there's any place like it for me. So I don't know if I'm allowed to say our home park.
Yeah, no, that works. That place. Paul, what about you?
Yeah, I've been fortunate to be in Boston, New York, and LA during the playoffs, and obviously at Fenway, one of the World Series. But it is Citizens Bank Park. During the playoffs, it's a different atmosphere. The fans bring. I get chills thinking about it. Like the energy that is coming in during the playoffs is awesome. And
I
can't wait to experience that again.
Yeah, some of the clips from a cold weather playoff game in October in Philly is just unbeatable. So I definitely agree there. Moving on to third base, Joe. Outside of the actual game, what's your favorite city to visit on the road?
I think Paul probably knows this answer for me already. It's Pittsburgh for me. My family's from outside. My dad's from outside of there. I spent some time around there. I went to the University of Pittsburgh, and there's a piece of that I've been going to PNC Park since it was opened. I remember being a student there, and that's when athletic training really became a real career path for me. So there's a full circle moment for me to be in that dugout and to be in that city and to be working on this level with this group that's always pretty special to me.
For sure. And Paul, how about yourself?
Yeah, Chicago. Same reasons, family. I'm from the Midwest, and my mom lives there. So, but it's a really great city downtown too.
Moving on to home plate. Last question for today for you guys. Joe, you've been around baseball forever, in the big leagues for a while now. When you first got the call up, was there a point in time when you had like a welcome to the big leagues moment? I made it.
I don't know. So I'd gotten to work Major League spring training, and when Paul brought me out to the Major League staff, that got blown to hell because of COVID. So that was like a whole weird thing. So I don't know if it was my first year, but when fans came back in the opening day introductions and standing on the line with the team in a park, I went to high school in Delaware and spent a lot of time in Philly, my life, and being in that park on the field it didn't feel like I made it moment. It felt like I can't believe I'm here and I am going to do whatever it takes to not let it go away type of moment. Like it felt like a start, not an end, if that makes sense. Yeah. But yeah, my first opening day with fans and everybody there and my family in the stands, that would be it. And
Paul, how about you?
It was actually maybe right before I got called up. I was a coordinator, got called up to help out. And, I remember Brad Pearson telling me like, the thing about this job is that you're going to get challenged to be better just by walking through the door. And as a coordinator, I found myself on the bench in Detroit by myself because we had a lot of stuff going on. First baseman gets bleeded and he's bleeding all over the place. And that was my first welcoming party of going on the field. I'm doing a field dressing and, got TV and fans watching me and John Farrell, hey, can you hurry up? It was awesome. But that's like one of my first memories of like, hey, you better be ready,
Yeah, for sure. Well, guys, really appreciate your time. Always enjoy chatting with you on the show. Appreciate you sharing your insight into some awesome research you guys are working on and for always being an awesome voice for athletic trainers and PBATs, and wish you and nothing but the best of luck for the Phillies this upcoming season.
Thank you very much, Sam.
Appreciate it, Sam.
Thank you for listening to the Inside Athletic Training Podcast. For more information about PBATs and athletic training, visit pbats.com. See you next time.